Well, hello and welcome along to a very special interview from the Honest Football Podcast, because today Charlie speaks to a man who was picked for an England squad by Sir Alf Ramsey, played against some of the greats of the game, including Pele and Eusebio, also won the FA Youth Cup at Burnley in his first season involved in professional football, and perhaps most importantly, spent the majority of his career becoming a legend on the pitch at Luton Town. He also returned in a unique role off it later in life. We'll find out a bit more about that, but we hope you enjoy this one. It is My Football Story with Alan West.
And I'm delighted to say that Alan joins us now. Alan, thank you so much for coming along. I do appreciate you're actually the first player, I think, who's shared a pitch with both Beckenbauer, Bobby Moore and Pele. So you've really ticked a few boxes for us on the podcast. But it's great to have you here to talk about not just your sort of football career, but also your life outside of football as well. So, just first of all, thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
So, Alan, what we'd like to do with everyone, regardless of whatever level they've played at, and, you know, you played at the elite level, is just your talk us through your first ever memory of football. So be it sort of playing or the first ever game that you watched. What's your first ever memory of a beautiful game?
I suppose as a child, really, as a kid. I mean, I just started playing football with the Cubs. That's where it all started for me. Started playing football with the Cubs. And I was about 7 or 8, I think. And that was where I just realised, you know, my dad particularly realised that, you know, I had an ability that was just natural, really. So I just loved playing football and was pretty good at it. So that's where I first started. And of course, I lived in near Manchester. So, you know, I grew up just outside Manchester. So watching Manchester City as a kid with the likes of, you know, Bobby Charlton, Dennis Law, George Best and the likes. I just grew up surrounded by football that I love, but, you know, some of the world's greatest ever players.
Yeah, you're really in that sort of hotspot, weren't you, for football, you know, in terms of a hotbed of football around there. In terms of at school then, were you, because obviously you went on to play, you know, for your country and all sorts, but were you, as a youngster, were you that much better than everyone else, or were you a bit more of a slower developer, as they say sort of nowadays in that sense?
Yeah, I was probably better than everybody else, you know, in the Cubs and then at school. So, yeah, I was pretty much outstanding, really, as a sort of 8-year-old, 10-year-old, 11-year-old. When I first went to senior school, just to kind of give you an idea, I first went to senior school, what they called it back in those days. So when I was 11, 12, you know, the sports master put me in the top team, you know, the sort of 4th and 5th year team. So I was really outstanding as a youngster, really, playing for my schools and then for my area, which was Northeast Cheshire, and then the local sort of Hyde schools, Northeast Cheshire, and then Cheshire Schoolboys when I was like 14. So I was kind of an outstanding young player, although I was quite small and frail. When I was young, I had this sort of ability.
And then that obviously led you on to Burnley, which at the time was, you know, very famous youth system and all that sort of thing. Could you sort of just talk us through that? I know you ended up winning the FA Youth Cup with them as well, if I remember correctly, but just sort of talk us through that journey from being at school and being outstanding at school to then sort of going to one of the best sort of youth teams in the country at that point.
Yeah, I can actually remember the game. I was playing for my school team against another school team in the sort of local, the next town. And little did I know that the school master there, the sports master there, was a scout for Burnley. I had no idea. And at the end of the game, he wandered over to me. He said, "Alan, we beat them 3-0. I scored all 3 goals." And he came over to me and he said, "Have you ever thought about, you know, playing football?" So that's all I ever dream of, sir, you know.
Yeah.
And he said, "Well, would you like to go to Burnley for a week's trial?" And so I went to, if I remember correctly, I went to like half term. I was 14, and at the end of that week, the manager, it was Harry Potts, came to visit me, mum and dad, and me, and offered me an apprenticeship immediately. So I was like 14, and he said, "As soon as you leave school next year, you know, next summer at 15, we'll give you an apprenticeship at Burnley." Well, this was like a dream come true.
Yeah, of course.
Because, you know, I was like, Burnley were a top team back then. I mean, they were in the top sort of 3 or 4 of the old first division, which of course is the Premier League today. But just, Charlie, to let you know how things work so fast, within a week, Joe Armstrong, who was the chief scout of Man United, came knocking on my door as well. Wow. So I had Man United knocking on my door. Burnley had offered me a contract, and a few weeks later, Man City as well. So I was 14 with the option of these 3 great clubs to go to as a 14-year-old. So I plugged to go to Burnley because they have this fantastic youth system, and they produce players all the time. So did other clubs and other teams, but I just thought that I had a better chance there of making it and then making me a player. And fortunately, as you mentioned earlier, I did join them straight away, straight from school. And in the first year that I was there, we had a brilliant bunch of players. And we won the FA Youth Cup in 1968, the only time Burnley have ever won it. And so I'm proud of that as part of that squad, but it was my first season as an apprentice professional. And then we go and win, the National Youth Cup. So it's a fantastic start to my career.
Yeah, I think that's, if you can cope with those sort of games, I suppose it makes it the next sort of part of the career quite a bit easier in that sense. But in terms of that transition then, going from the youth team, like you said, that, with the sort of the label of, being the best one in the country. And then, how did your first team opportunities come about? And how did you find that transition in terms of, is it a bit more physical, maybe between obviously the youth team and then training and playing with the first team? And what are those sort of differences, I suppose, between playing for the youth team and eventually playing for the first team in that sense?
Yeah, my progress was, I suppose in a way it was fairly slow. Some of my teammates, my colleagues, were already playing for Burnley reserves and into the first team when they were sort of 16, 17, 18, because they were very fit. They were physically much more mature than I was. So it took me a little while. So I stayed in the A team and the B team for a season or more. And then I progressed into the reserve team a season later. So I think I got my first team outing at Burnley when I was 18. And I think I played one game that season. And I think for me, it was just they were waiting for me to mature physically.
Right.
I had the skills and the abilities, but I certainly was nowhere near ready for the physicality of the Premier League, of First Division. It's extremely physical. And I wasn't quite ready for that. And I'm grateful to Burnley for that because they didn't push me. They waited till I was ready or almost ready. And then I think the following season, I was almost not an ever present. That wouldn't be true. But I played probably half a season or more in the first division. So my progress was steady. Sort of each year I'd go from the B team to the A team to the reserve team and then into the first team, play a few games and then become a sort of a fairly ever-present. When I was sort of 18, 19, I broke into the first team squad with a lot of those players that I mentioned were in the youth team. So we had some great players at Burnley, but they sold a lot of them on. So these young youth team players were coming through one by one. And so I was very fortunate to be in such a great squad. As I said, I went there from school and as a schoolboy at 14, worked my way through the teams. I had some great friends there. We had a great, youth team. I had great digs of people the families that I lived with in Burnley. So I really enjoyed my time at Burnley. I loved it. I never thought I'd leave, really. So I had no plans of leaving Burnley. It was my club, and I really enjoyed it until I had I'd worked my way through into the first team. Was being spotted by clubs all over the country. And then I got into the England squad. I got in England under 23 squad at 19. Sir Alf Ramsey saw me playing at QPR, and the next day I was in the England squad. And it was just unbelievable. But at the end of that season, I had a fallout with Burnley because they were offering me a brand new contract, for absolute peanuts. They were offering me another £5 a week for another 4-year contract. So I fell out with them, I mean, it's crazy, isn't it? I was on £30 a week playing in the first division, playing for England with Keegan and MacDonald and all that crowd. And I was earning £30 a week. And they wanted to pay me £35 a week. So we had a bit of a fallout. And I was suddenly the blue-eyed boy who became the black sheep,
Right.
And it was really sad, really. So I was kind of ousted. And then I had to play out my contract for 2 years. You had back in those days, you had a clause in your contract. It was like a 2-year clause. So I had to play that out, and I played in the reserves mainly. And then, of course, I was transferred after that time. I was transferred to Sunderland after they just won the FA Cup, beating Leeds. And they signed me just a few months after that, because they wanted to get out to the second division to the first. And I was a young player that they'd signed, and I failed the medical. Which was traumatic. But a few weeks later, Luton came in and signed me, and well, the rest is history.
Yeah, just on that really quickly, just to go back a step, the thing of playing for your country and, all that, I mean, that's why I really wanted to sort of everyone else to hear your story. It's just some of the names that you've come across in your career, like, you mentioned Sir Alf Ramsey and that kind of thing. But just in terms of the accolades of playing in club football and then representing your country, where do you sort of place both of them? Are they sort of both would you sort of equally, do you know what I mean? Or is playing for your country just that little bit more special, in that sense?
I think, Charlie, that playing for your country, that was always my dream, I think. My dream was to represent my country. I grew up as a kid, I suppose never thinking that I'd do it, but I grew up as a kid with all these ambitions and dreams. And then when I went to Burnley and I was surrounded by great coaches and great players, it kind of helped me and enhanced my game. And so I think playing for my country would probably be the pinnacle of my career. Sadly, I only represented England under 23s 3 times, and as I said, I had this fallout. Once you have a fallout, you're not in the first team, so you're not getting seen by the managers and coaches. So that was a very difficult time for me. But I think, and then my time at Burnley, winning the FA Youth Cup at 16, playing in the first division, being part of that squad there. I think they're very important times for me. I look back on those very important. But the pinnacle would, of course, be for me was playing for my country. And then, of course, at Burnley, they also got relegated, but we also got promoted there around in the early 70s. And then I got transferred to Luton, and we were promoted straight away in 1974. So we were promoted from Division 2 to Division 1 with Luton Town, and that was a dream. I've only been there 6 months, and now we're in the Premier League. We're in Division 1. So it was a brilliant move for me personally. It was a great transfer for me. In fact, Sunderland didn't get out of that league; they stayed in Division 2. And Luton got promoted, so it all worked out for me in the end.
Yeah, that's such a blessing in that sense. Just briefly, before we talk about your time at Luton, obviously you mentioned about being promoted to the first division. Going from the second to the first division, obviously, you talk about the best teams in the country then. Is there quite a big step? I know we're going back, obviously, into when, it's very different now from the Premier League and, Championship, etc. But is the quality of players, and it seems obvious, but what are those sort of differences, I suppose, between going from the second to the first division?
Yes, Charlie, definitely. I think people don't realise, even back then, people don't realise the difference. Now it's even greater. The gap is even greater today, of course. But in my day, going from Division 2 to Division 1, it was a huge jump. And I think I'd played in the first division, of course, with Burnley, so I knew what to expect. And there were 2 or 3 other players in the Luton team that had played in the first division, like Jimmy Husband, John Aston. So there were 2 or 3 of us who'd actually experienced, Premier League first division football. And I think it took us a while to adjust, and it certainly took some of our team months to really adjust to the different pace. But also, I think the difference really is at both ends of the pitch. And I've said this coming season for Luton in the Premier League. If you don't take your chances and take the half chances of the chances you get, you might not get another chance. And at the other end, if you give away a chance, the forwards in the Premier League first division are that much better. It's in the back of the net before you know it. And so the difference for me at the higher level is that both ends of the pitch, the forwards are so much more ruthless and skillful to score goals. And defensively, if you don't take your chances, you might not get any more.
Yeah, no. I think that's really, it's fascinating to hear that, because obviously, people like me sit in the stands or watch it on TV, and you sort of hammer someone for not, passing the ball or shooting and stuff. But until I suppose you're in there and you make that step, you just don't really understand, do you? I suppose so.
No, you don't really understand until you make the step, and you're in the middle of it. And I know Luton now will have played 2 games, but they will have learned so much that this is a completely different world.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think we'll sort of come back to Luton now a bit later on, if that makes sense. But just wanted to sort of touch really, I know we'll come back to sort of when you were at Luton as a player as well, but just about your time in America, because I think without sort of giving away too much, it was quite a formative time, both maybe as a footballer, but also maybe as a person. So my first sort of part to that question was how common was it for players to maybe in the off season go off to America like you did and play professionally over there? And then maybe just some of the impact that it had on you both sort of as a footballer, but also maybe sort of the rest of your life after that, if that makes sense, Alan.
Yeah. No, it wasn't common. It wasn't common for players to go over to the States. In fact, my situation was quite unique. My manager at the time, Harry Haslam, he only did it as a favour, really. He was trying to help me get to New Zealand. I mean, the story is quite long-winded and complicated, but I'll keep it as brief as I can. Harry Haslam was trying to get me to get to New Zealand to visit my wife's parents. And in the mix of that, he was trying to get me to do a bit of coaching or something in the summer in New Zealand, in Christchurch or Auckland or somewhere. And then all of a sudden, out of the blue, he got a phone call from a manager, a coach called Freddie Goodwin, starting a new team in Minnesota. And he'd been appointed as the manager, the coach of Minnesota Kicks. It's a brand new team. And he just said to Harry, have you got any lads that might be able to pick up or bring over here or whatever? And Harry he just had a chat with him and said, well, it's just for a one-off. He said, was there any way you'd like to take Alan? Because he wants to get to New Zealand and he's halfway there. So it was all done in like a tongue-in-cheek, really. And the next thing I do, the next thing I know, I'm speaking to Harry Haslam, speaking to Freddie Goodwin. They make an agreement for me to go over just for the summer season. And it happened that it was 1976 and it was the bicentennial season in America of 200 years of independence. And the whole nation was closing down for 2 weeks. Right. So everything stopped, everybody off work, 2 weeks national holiday, and I could go to New Zealand for 2 weeks with my wife, Kathy, to visit her mum and dad. And that was all part of the deal. And I can get back to what happened to us in New Zealand later, but that did change our lives, going to New Zealand. And so I was part of this team. And again, we had some very good players. And some of the players that were there were lads that were playing for West Brom or Middlesbrough, lads that were coming towards the end of the career or have been let go by the clubs. And we had a fantastic team again. We got to the final. It was absolutely amazing. We actually got to the final of the soccer ball, and we lost in the final to Toronto. And the goal scorer in that was Eusebio. He got the winner, I think. So there were all these incredible players playing over there at that time. And there's me. I'm at my peak. I'm 24. I'm captain of Luton Town. I'm at my peak, and I'm playing for Minnesota Kicks with a fantastic squad. And then because we did so well, they wanted all those players to come back every year. So then they made a deal with Luton to let me go every summer. And that's how I was there for 4 summers. Playing for Luton as captain, finishing on a Saturday, flying out on a Sunday or a Monday to Minneapolis, to Minnesota, playing there for their season and flying straight back on the last game, starting back at Luton. It was mad. I did that for 4 years, Charlie. It was mad.
You must have been the fittest player in England at that point.
I must have been. I loved every minute of it. I absolutely loved every minute of it. And I got to play some against some of the greatest players of all time.
Yeah, sort of. Just quickly, just for people who don't maybe know.
Yeah, I mean, some of the players playing there, of course, Pele, Beckenbauer, Cruyff, George Best, Bobby Moore, Eusebio, as I've mentioned, Gerd Muller. They were all out there at the end of their careers. Rodney Marsh, all these. I wasn't at the end of my career. I was actually in my peak, and I think probably alongside winning my England cap was in 1977 when I was chosen in the All-Star team, which is where the players choose their best 11. And so I was chosen, in the midfield 3, alongside George Best, Beckenbauer, and me. So not bad, is it?
That's not a bad midfield, that is it? To be fair, Alan.
Not bad. And Pele up front with whoever else. There was, Gordon Banks in goal and Mike England centre half, and yeah, I was very fortunate, Charlie. I was very, very fortunate, mate.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think maybe doing yourself a disservice. You obviously deserve to be there and receive those sort of accolades. Just to park football for a minute, then, Alan, because you mentioned about maybe going on to New Zealand, and it'd be great for people to sort of hear that side of the story, because to bring it back to football later on, you ended up working back at Luton Town in a particular role, and I don't want to tell your story because it's yours to sort of tell, but just maybe explain a bit more about what happened after that. That's okay.
Yeah, sure. We'd gone to America, as I said, when I was playing football there, but there was this 2-week window to jet out to New Zealand and visit Kathy's mum and dad, who'd moved from Burnley to New Zealand in 1973. just a few months before I came to Luton Town, they'd made a decision to emigrate to New Zealand, start a new life. And not long after they'd been there, a few months or maybe 6 months or a year or whatever, they started to tell us about they found a wonderful new life in New Zealand. They loved living there. They loved the country. They made some great friends. But they'd also started going along to church, and that they'd both become Christians. And this had absolutely transformed their lives. And we were, of course, me and Kathy, I certainly, and Kathy, we weren't brought up as Christians. Didn't go to church. Last place you'd ever find me. Wasn't interested in, I didn't know anything about church, God, nothing. I wasn't interested in, about, my religion was football and sport. But when we went there to New Zealand, they invited us to go to the church with them on the 2 Sundays that we were there, and meeting all their friends and their Christian friends and neighbours and people there. And it was the first time, I'd ever heard the message really of Christianity, and it just started to make sense. So long story short, we were there for 2 weeks. Kathy stayed on another week with her mum and dad. I had to fly back and, get back to work. We became Christians whilst we were there. The very last day we were there, it all seemed to make sense to us, and we made this commitment. That's the other way I can word it without sounding too sort of religious. And we just became believers, if you like. I jetted back to Minneapolis, to Minnesota, and instantly that following weekend started looking for a church to attend, which I thought, I've gone mad. What's wrong with me? I normally go out. I'm normally out there in the nightclub, living the life, And now I'm looking for a church to go to. So our lives have begun to change and become very different. So that's where it all starts. So going to New Zealand and America, we went to the church there. We went to a couple of great churches in America. I learned a lot. But when I came back to Luton, we started to look around Luton for a church, and eventually found a church that we liked. It took us months and months. And of course, my teammates started to notice that I was kind of different, or my attitude and behaviour was different than it had been prior, and started asking me questions. So that was the start of my faith journey as a Christian, but also as a professional footballer. So that they dovetailed together, but it wasn't easy, because people wondered what on earth. Because I was captain, of course. I was ringleader on the pitch and ringleader off the pitch,
Well, it was interesting because I've spoken to a few footballers, but they're still playing, still sort of active, that phrase, and it just who maybe spoke about their faith and just some of the challenges that maybe they faced, in that dressing room culture. And I've never sort of been part of that, but that kind of sort of thing. And it was more just maybe the slight differences, if you don't want me to say, maybe the era that you were playing in, whether the challenges were a bit more different. It's hard to say, isn't it? But just, did you feel like that going back to your dressing room sort of after that was a different experience, for want of a better phrase?
Yeah, I think it was. I think it was different, and dressing rooms at professional level are very they're very loud and can be very highly charged emotional places. There's a lot of stake. So everybody's pumped, as you can well imagine. You had a big game, a lot of stake, points at stake, money at stake, fans, thousands of fans, managers' jobs on the line, etc. Huge pressure at top level professional sport. And when you're the captain, of course, you're expected to be the leader. And so my life had started to change in terms of my attitude, my behavior, even my vocabulary and my vocal attitude had begun to change. Where every other word was F this and F that. Now all that had begun to fall away and change, and so people began to notice a big difference in me, and so would ask me questions. I think my ability to play hadn't changed at all. In fact, I do believe I became a better player. So no one had any qualms about my ability, and I think that is what's really important. If you're a professional at anything, then certainly as a Christian, you ought to be the best you can be, and that's what I determined to become. And I think that because my abilities and my attitude and the way I trained and the way I worked hard, no one ever had any qualms, although people would take the mickey, of course, and people didn't understand what it meant to be a Christian, or why I'd suddenly become religious in their words, which I hope I certainly wasn't, but that's their understanding of church people, that you're religious. And I hope I wasn't that at all. So I had, in fact, Harry Haslam he nicknamed me after about 3 months. My nickname in the dressing room was Billy Graham.
Right.
What do you think, Billy?
I suppose there's worse nicknames to have, though, Alan, isn't there? In that sense,
absolutely.
Given the just to bring it back to football, we'll sort of come back to that side of your story as well a bit later on. We obviously mentioned about you coming back and maybe the change. You said you became almost maybe a better player. How did that also coincide with like David Pleat arriving, and how did you sort of view that period of Luton towards the end, maybe as you're staying there?
I think I became a Christian in '76 when I was 24, and Harry was the manager. And I think Harry left in '79. I think so. I'd been going back and forward to the States, playing in the States in the summer, playing for Luton, and we'd been in that top 6 or 8 each year, trying to get re-promoted, and it didn't work. We just didn't quite make it. And then we had a pretty mediocre season, and Harry moved on to Sheffield United, and so there's a little bit of an unsteady time for them because David Pleat took over, and I think it was a shock to everybody, probably a shock to David, because David was the reserve team coach, and he hadn't been at Luton very long. He'd been there, I think, maybe 2 or 3 seasons, helping out with the reserve team, and he'd become reserve team coach, and he wasn't really involved in the first team. I mean, that was Harry Haslam and Roy McCrohan ran the first team. David ran the second team. And then when Harry left, within a few weeks, they promoted David to first team coach. And it shocked a lot of people. I think it shocked some of the fans, and it certainly shocked some of the senior players. Because David had been, I think prior to that, he'd been a Nuneaton, and he'd been reserve team coach. But I have to say, it didn't take very long. Some of those senior players left at the end of that season, but it didn't take, and I decided, I made a conscious decision to stay. I thought, no, I want to stay, and I wanted to support David. And I loved Luton Town Football Club. I loved the club, and it's always been a great family club. I wanted to stay, and it didn't take long for David to start putting his thumbprint upon the way he wanted things to go. Didn't take long for him to sign some very good players in the likes of people like, Mal Donaghy and Kirk Stevens, Jake Finlay, who suddenly, and then there were many others, who I could name, but he suddenly brought in players that didn't cost the earth, but were really good players. But he also had, of course, coming through the ranks, the likes of Ricky Hill, Brian Steen, really top-class young players coming through. And so it didn't take long. Lily Fucillo and 1 or 2 others were coming through the ranks and would soon be establishing themselves as outstanding players. So I played there with David for, I'm guessing, about three or 4 seasons until I was coming to the end to pass my best. And then at the end of, I think it was the season 81-82, I was in and out the side the last few months, but still feeling I had a lot to offer. I wanted to keep playing, and David didn't want me to leave, but said, look, I can't promise you'll play every game. There's Radian Teach, there's you, there's Lily, all vying for one position, So I said, yeah, I fully understand that, David, but I still wanted to play. And so that's when I moved, I left there at the end of that season, which was, can you believe it was the promotion season. As I left, they got promoted. But I went to Millwall for a couple of years with Peter Anderson, who was my teammate in the 70s when we got promoted. Peter Anderson was my midfield teammate, and he got the manager's job at Millwall. And he pestered me every day, phoning me every day, to come and join him because he had a load of great kids. And I was 31 by then, and past my best. So I went down there and I played at Millwall for a couple of seasons, or about a season and a half, before Peter sadly got sacked and George Graham came in.
So yeah, obviously, Alan, you mentioned about coming towards the end at Millwall of your career. I just wondered the sort of thought process. Unfortunately, I suppose everyone's professional football career has to finish at some point. Like, how did that impact on you? And we hear quite a lot of stories of some people who can move on quite well from the fact their football career's finished, and others it's a bit of a sort of sticking point for them. Like, how was that for you, sort of retiring from professionally anyway? Because I know you did carry on obviously for years and years afterwards playing, but in the professional game.
Yeah, I think it's hard. It's hard when it's all you've ever done and it's your passion. I think for every player, probably not every player, but most players, it's that time that you dread the most, because it's the one thing that you love. It's what you've always done. I mean, I left school, like I said, at 15, and I've been in professional football, living my dream, you know. So when it was coming toward the end, it's always hard to actually say to yourself, actually, you know, you are past your best. It was a hard time. I found it difficult to transition. I wasn't sure what I was going to do. I had my ideas that, you know, I thought I'll go into coaching. I enjoyed coaching. I'd already done some of my coaching badges. And then I got an opportunity as I finished at Millwall to go to Hitchin Town as player manager. And I did that for a little while, Charlie. I did that for about 4 years. But I didn't really enjoy it. I didn't get the same buzz from coaching and managing that I did playing. I just loved to play. So I was still playing there, but I picked up some, you know, quite serious injuries in my mid-30s. Needed a couple of operations, Achilles tendons and things like that, which were very nasty injuries. And so I thought, is this what I want to do with the rest of my life? And I decided that really it wasn't, I didn't have that drive. I wasn't getting up in the morning thinking, I really love this, you know. And so that's why I began to think about other options, about what did I want to do. You know, I was 35 now, probably 34, 35, done a couple of years at Hitchin Town as player manager. And so that's when I decided to think about other things. And because I've been involved in the local church, I've been involved in all kinds of different things, I've been involved with people. I wanted to be involved with people. So I started looking at being a social worker and things like that, where I could be involved with people. And then I had this opportunity to get involved in church ministry. And that's what I did. I transitioned in my mid-30s. Whilst player managing at Hitchin Town, I transitioned into church leadership and into church ministry.
On a personal level, Alan, I think I might have even seen you play a couple of times for Christians in Sport. Through my dad was involved in local football. So I was born in 1989. So just to give a bit of context, obviously, without giving away too much of your age, you'd have probably been, you know, where you played for a long time after, you know, retiring. So I do vaguely remember seeing you play in that. But was sort of sport a part of it? I know obviously your day to day would have been ministry in the church, but how important was sort of sport in that role as well? You know, you mentioned, I mentioned about you being involved with Christians in Sport, for example, and things like that.
Yeah, I continued. I mean, sport has always been part of my life from day one, from, you know, whatever it was, whether it was football, cricket, athletics, swimming, you name it. I was, you know, I played almost every sport. I just love the sport. I still love sport. I can't play it, do so much these days because of some health issues. But I was always involved. And even when I retired from playing for, you know, Luton, Millwall, and then Hitchin, and I still kept myself very fit. Every day I'll be down the gym, I'll be running over Warden Hills. Every single day, so I've always been very, very fitness conscious. And you know, and helping out with the Christians in Sport setup, coaching, managing, playing. You know, we ran 2 teams for 20 odd years. So I was always involved in, you know, going watching the odd game of football. But I wanted to be. I don't watch that much football. I haven't watched that much football since I retired. But I wanted to be involved in sport. And really up until recent years, till I, you know, a heart issue, I've been very, very involved in all kinds of sports. It's just been part of my everyday life. You know, I was leading the church, but, you know, I was still running and still going to the gym or swimming, and you name it, I was still doing it all, really. I was probably the fittest person in the church.
There might be a few people who no, I'm joking. No. I think you're probably right, to be fair, Alan, on that. Just to sort of round it off then, because we mentioned about, you know, obviously Luton being a massive part of your career, and then, you know, being a church leader being a huge part of your life. The sort of two come together for a while, where you actually, and a lot of, you know, people who watch this will be football fans, and probably a large amount of them be Luton fans. You actually work as part of the club, as part of like the chaplain Just without going into obviously personal details, what does that sort of role entail, and how does that sort of work?
I did that in a couple of stints actually. My first stint doing that, which most people wouldn't know about, was when David Pleat came back to Luton Town on his second management time there. And he gave me a call one day out of the blue and said, Alan, would you be interested in sort of helping me out and doing a little bit of sort of chaplaincy role in the background? So I said, well, I find that really interesting. I said, yeah, of course, David. So I met up with David, and it was a very low key. My chaplaincy role at Luton was always in the background, really. It was very low key. And so I went, and I used to go in half a day a week then when David was in his second thing, and train with the youth. He predominantly wanted me to be around for the young players, especially young lads that were travelling into Luton from far away. They were coming in from Wales or Ireland or Yorkshire, and coming to a new place. And I would kind of meet up with them, try to help them settle in, things like that. I think and I did that in the background. No, but it wasn't really known, or it wasn't advertised that I was the club chaplain. It was kind of done under the radar, really. I think that was around the John Hartson times, when John Hartson was a young player at Luton in that sort of era. And then, of course, David left and moved on. And my role sort of finished then, because it was a very personal commitment that David had asked me to do. And then a few years later, out of the blue again, I got a call from the club, from Cherry Newbury. And Cherry called me one day and said, could we have a meeting with you, Alan? We've been talking as directors and the club. We'd like you to consider being our chaplain. And again, I was honoured, really. And so I did that for a number of years until I retired. 6 years ago now, 6.5 years ago, I retired from my work in the church. And I retired from my role as chaplain at Luton Town. But I'd done that. I've probably done it, pretty much under the radar again for a good 10 or 15 years. Just being around, going to home games, being there. Things like people have got real major issues, or people have got, there's bereavement in the club, or,
right.
That kind of thing. I took loads of funerals of ex-directors or secretaries and people like that. People would never know. Or I would be there for the families who were grieving, and sometimes I talked to one or two players, but obviously those things are very, very private, obviously.
Of course. Yeah. No, absolutely. I think it's it's such an important role that maybe doesn't always get, not that you do it for the kudos, but it's such an underpins so much of the club that maybe people don't always. So it's great to hear that sort of side of it. Just a last one before we always finish with some quickfire questions, which I know you've probably been asked tons, but before we get to them, just like in terms of your thoughts now, and obviously the journey Luton have been on, and are you still able to go to games and things like that? I mean, there's a video when I was doing, obviously I know you, but in terms of the research of when Luton were playing Hyde, and that was within the last decade, which you featured on, and now they're obviously as we're recording, they're playing West Ham tomorrow night. So it's quite a journey. Just what your thoughts on that are, really, in that sense.
Yeah, I think it's an incredible journey. I think it's a remarkable story, really. I mean, they didn't deserve to be relegated all the way down there in the beginning, but that's history. And I think that when they tumbled down through the leagues, down into the conference, it's just an unbelievable story that Luton Town could end up at that level. But the journey back, I think, is a story that should be focused on, and I think it's a remarkable story. And I think the fans at Luton have been fantastic. They've been loyal, faithful through thick and thin. Lots of fans for the other teams would have just abandoned them, but not the Luton fans. They've been loyal through thick and thin. But I think the 2020 team, the group of directors, leaders of the club, have a real vision and a set of values that they're willing to stick by. And I think that's what's seen them through. And bit by bit by bit by bit, in 10 or 12 years, they've come from the conference up to the Premier League. And I was at the Wembley playoff. It was a fantastic day. It was and the club invited me as a guest. It was me and my son Josh. It was a remarkable day. We had the best possible day. But I've just got tremendous respect for the players, the coaches, but certainly for the likes of the directors and for Gary Sweet, the CEO, and that team of people. They are Luton Town through and through. And I think that's what's got them to where they are today. And I wish them all the best. I know this season is going to be incredibly tough, but I wish them all the best.
Yeah, I think it's like, say, sort of, it's such an amazing blueprint of how to run a football club, sort of well, really, in that sense, isn't
Absolutely.
it? Alan, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Just before we go, we always finish with some quick fire questions. So I do apologise. You've probably been asked lots of these before, particularly of all the people I've spoken to on this, the names that you could potentially come up with, probably quite out there. But just your favourite ground you've ever played at to begin with.
Oh, my favourite ground, I suppose it's got to be Old Trafford.
Right, yeah, of course, yeah. I think that goes without saying. This next one is one we sort of ask some players, because for some players it's quite important, for others not so much. Did you have like a favourite pair of boots across your career that you maybe just wore until they were, nearly dust in that sense, or were you? Do you know what I mean? Was that something that was important to you in that sense?
Very, very important to me. Yeah, it's a good question. Because once I had a big split in one of my boots, and back in them days, of course, your boots lasted you a season or two, but not like today. And I remember saying, yeah, I love these boots, but they've all split down the side, need some new boots. And the physio, then the boot room chap, Reg Game, he sent me into the Arndale where there was a cobbler, so he fixed them up for me. I played about another 6 months in them. Mad, it's mad, but yeah, I think I used to love boots that fitted me really comfortable. I just didn't want to, and I always wore. I suppose not advertised, but I always wore Adidas boots. They always fit me perfect.
If you had to say like a favourite goal you've scored, not necessarily the best, but your favourite.
Well, I didn't score very many, and I certainly didn't score any goals that I can remember that were sort of won as a cup match or got us promoted. But I think probably I scored against Spurs at Kenilworth Road, and Pat Jennings was in goal, and I chipped him from the edge of the box, and that's not easy to do. No, so I was absolutely delighted with that goal.
Absolutely. And then this one, I know you've probably been asked this hundreds of times. The best player you played with and played against.
Wow.
For you, I imagine there's a whole list.
I have played with some tremendous players. The best player I played against, of course, was Pele. So that goes without saying. I played against Pele when he's played for New York Cosmos. And the best player I think I played with, I have to say, is Ricky Hill. If Ricky Hill had played for Man United or Liverpool or Arsenal or West Ham, the big clubs, he'd have played for England 50 times.
We ask everyone this. You had to have two favourite games. So one that you played in, the favourite game you've ever watched. So it could be on the TV or it could be in the stand, but one that you weren't involved in. So your favourite game as a player and your favourite game just as a football player, any game you want.
My favourite game that I watched, I think, has to be the 1970 World Cup final, Brazil. For me, still probably the greatest team ever. Plus, the Spanish team were pretty good. Was it whenever it was in 2010 or whatever. Best game I've ever played in. That's I don't know. That's a hard one. That is. I think probably away at Liverpool in 1974-75 season, and they talk about the Kop and the roar of the Kop, but I think it was a great game. We lost 2-1. We gave a real good account of ourselves, but that was an amazing game and an amazing atmosphere. I actually felt the Kop were blowing the ball into the net. It was just an amazing experience on a Tuesday night, with 60,000 Scousers against you.
Alan, it's been an absolute pleasure, and I've enjoyed every single second of talking to you. And just thank you for taking the time and giving us the privilege of sharing both your football story and also your life story as well in that sense. So thank you so much for joining us.
Okay, it's been my pleasure. Thanks so much. Thank you.